What's up, everybody? I was thinking the other day about what I could make for my next video, and something that I had always wondered is we see a lot of videos, a lot of reviews, things like that, and people talk about a good trigger on a gun, whether it's a handgun, rifle, whatever it may be. And we see lots of examples of good triggers. What's a good trigger? Of course, it's very objectionable. It's personal preference. Some people like certain triggers. Some people like striker fire. Some people like double action. Some people like single stage triggers. Some people like double stage or two stage triggers. Excuse me. And I was thinking, well, what's a bad trigger? When I first got into firearms, I don't know, 16, 17 years ago, I would shoot. Most of the guns I shot were older hunting rifles, things like that. And looking back on them, they did not have good triggers, but I didn't know any better. To me, I just thought, well, that's just what a trigger feels like. You pull it, and eventually it goes bang. And the more I got shooting, the more I started to realize, without anybody really explaining it to me, that wow, I shoot this gun a lot better. And a lot of times it's because that gun had a better trigger on it. So what I want to do today is look at two guns, two handguns. One has a very nice trigger and is pretty well renowned for having nice triggers from this manufacturer. The other one, the manufacturer normally does have nice triggers. However, this particular one does not have a nice trigger, and it's pretty well known for that. It is a pretty, I would say it's an outdated gun at this point in time. So, of course, the one that does have the nice trigger being the Canik. This is a TP9 SFX. This has since kind of been replaced in a way by some of the newer Mete series, the Rivals, things like that. But this was kind of the first, I would call it a budget-friendly gun that was competition-ready. And now lots of people run Caniks for competition guns. They are just known to be very good guns. I'm a big fan of Canik, and I've had a couple of them, and they've all had very nice triggers. They're all very consistent. I would say they're all very similar triggers, which I like. They're consistent, and you just know what you're getting, and you can shoot them well as a result of that. This is the Walther PK380. So this, of course, is chambered in 380, and this is a pretty outdated gun. I would say this is actually my wife's gun, and she's probably had this for, I would say, 10 years now, at least. I don't know exactly when this came out. It's actually not a bad gun. It's very slim. It's very easy to carry. It's very comfortable. It's, of course, 380. It doesn't have much recoil. Two things I do not like about it. There is no slide stop or slide release on there, as you can see. So there's no way to lock the slide back, and it doesn't lock back on last round of the magazine, nothing like that. And it is a double action, single action trigger. So this isn't the best comparison in that regard, but that's not really the point, is comparing the type of trigger. It's just, what's a good trigger, what's a bad trigger. There are lots of very good double single action triggers out there. I've had a number of CZs, Shadow 2s, and those have wonderful double single action triggers. This one does not. So I'm going to start with showing you what a good trigger should be. Now, this, of course, is subjective. Some people are going to say, well, I don't really care for it. But overall, most people would agree these are good attributes in a trigger. So we'll start with the Canik. These guns have been cleared beforehand, so just so you guys are aware of that. So the Canik does have somewhat of a unique trigger. However, once you get used to it, most people do like it. It's almost it's kind of like a double action trigger pull, in that it's pretty long. There's a lot of take up. However, it's pretty light, the take up. So there's kind of three stages to it. And the first stage is very light take up. And then there is a second stage, which is a little bit heavier, not much. but that goes right back to the wall and then it breaks. So that's why I say it's kind of a 3-stage trigger. However, it's very predictable. This is always the same no matter what. So when I shoot my Canex, when I am on target and ready to pull the trigger, I pretty much go right back to the wall. I don't mess around with, doing this slowly. I pretty much go right back to the wall. And when this breaks, what you want is a very nice, definitive, audible, and break that you can feel as well in your finger. So as you can see, once that broke, this is probably, if I had to guess, I'd say that's around a 4-pound trigger pull, something like that. And when it breaks, it also doesn't move back very far. As you can see, the trigger pretty much stops shortly after the break. It doesn't keep moving rearward to the back of the trigger guard. It pretty much stops. That is very good. That is what you want. You don't want a lot of over travel after the break has happened and you've fired a round. So the reset, good trigger work, I will call it, is once you pull the trigger, you hold it to the back, and then when you're ready, you let the trigger go forward. Now you could see there, it's very short. You could probably hear it if you could hear it over my voice. And it kind of forced my finger forward. So now I'm right back at the wall again, okay? And then I'm ready to shoot my next round. That is what you want. You don't want, some guns will have really long resets. So you'll pull it back, you'll fire your round, and then this one resets right there. But there's many guns that will reset out here, they'll reset out here, and then you've got another, then you have to pull it back and do all that. You don't really want that. So you come back right to the wall, it breaks, not much over travel. Nice short reset, break again. So this is what I would call just a very good trigger. Doesn't matter if it's a rifle, doesn't matter if it's in a double single action. Of course, if it was a double action trigger pull, it would be a little longer and a little heavier, but the principle is the same. Once it gets back to the wall, you know the trigger is going to break and you know that you're going to detonate the primer and the round's going to go off. Okay. So there is a good trigger pull. So let's go to what I would consider a bad trigger pull. Again, some people don't like double single action triggers because they're not as consistent. The first trigger pull, of course, is going to be double action, and it's going to be very long, and it's going to be very heavy. Now, some really good double single action triggers, like if you've ever shot a Shadow 2, something down those lines, I would highly recommend it if you haven't, to try one out. But they have a pretty light double action. They also don't have a lot of what's called stacking, which means that the trigger pull is pretty consistent as you pull it rearward. It's going to be long, and it is going to be a little heavier. However, this is an example of what you don't want. So there's this really loose take up, kind of like a mechanic, but it doesn't feel as nice. And then you start pulling the trigger back. Now this is very heavy. This is already probably, I would say 8-9 pounds, maybe 10. Okay. So this is not what you really want. Even in a double action trigger pull, this is very heavy. You can see the hammer starting to move back. Very heavy, and it's getting heavier as it goes back. Now, in practice, what this is doing is when you're trying to stay on target and you keep pulling that trigger back, you're waiting for it to go off. But if you are straining your finger trying to pull it out, you're moving the gun, especially if you're not well trained. Now, of course, anybody can train with this and, get better at pulling it, but you're really training, you're kind of jerking the trigger back. It's not a smooth, fluid motion. So anyway, I'll get to it. This is very heavy. This is probably 12, 13 pounds by now. I'm actually kind of straining, and then you think you're at the wall because it's stopped and it's not going much further. and you can see it keeps going back, and this is really heavy, still going back, really heavy, and finally it breaks. And you can see, I mean, this physically cannot go any further back into the trigger guard, just because it's already physically touching the back. So the reset on this one is not horrible, but it's really light, and this doesn't. I got to give my finger a break. This is not a great trigger in this gun. Okay, so now the take up or the reset, as you can see, this is already quite a bit longer than the Canik, and there it resets. So it's not horrible, but I couldn't really feel it. The audible part of it wasn't very loud. It just wasn't, it's not horrible. The reset's actually not that bad in this gun, but that double action trigger pull it's horrendous. It's not good. And that is from somebody who has actually shot quite a few double single action guns. This one it's not pleasant to shoot. Now, you can, of course, just shoot this in single action where you can pull the hammer back. And again, if you take this to the range, presumably it's empty. So you put your magazine in, you rack your slide, and then you're going to be, now this one's on safe, which I'm going to leave it on safe. And then you're in single action mode. Now there is a tiny bit of take up, and then it's still very heavy though. It has a little bit of a better break, more predictable when it's in single action, of course, which is always the case. It's always a lighter, your single action trigger pull in a double action single action is always going to be better in that regard. However, it's still not great. It's still difficult to predict when that trigger sear is going to break and it's going to detonate the primer, all of that. It's not the worst, but it's not great either. It's very, you can see there's a lot of play in that trigger. Again, I'll show you that double action. It's pretty rough. So that is the example of a bad trigger. So if you're new to guns and you buy something, probably not this, but buy something similar. Now, most Walthers, I will say, generally have very good triggers. So this is not a Walther problem. Just to be clear, this is a PK380 problem. If you buy a gun and you just don't shoot it that well, it's hard to be consistent. Whatever, you're new to guns, you don't really know what's going on. Maybe there is actually something with the gun that's not agreeing with you. So, keep that in mind before you buy a firearm. If you're not that familiar, you can ask people. You can ask people at the gun store, whatever it may be, reviews. Is the trigger good? Generally speaking, most people will say, yes, it's good, or it's not that great. So, again, I'll show you the Canik, and then I'll wrap this video up. All right, a little bit of take up, kind of the second stage, as I like to call it. But again, once you get used to this, you just pull it right back to the wall. Nice crisp break. Reset, very good. And then I'd like to do a side-by-side, but maybe I can do that. Okay, here we go. This is experimental. I did not plan this beforehand, but I will show this trigger. These are both pointed in safe directions, by the way. Okay, so again, not really a true fair comparison because the Canik is a striker fire gun and then the Walther is a double action in right now. So I will get both back to the wall, at least what I think the wall is, and then, so as you can see, much less straining when you're shooting the Canik. I do recommend, generally speaking, striker fires, especially to new shooters, because that trigger pull is going to be the exact same no matter what. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's always going to be the exact same. So your Glocks, your M&P 2.0s, your CZ P10s, your Caniks, Walther P99, all of those are are going to be striker fire guns, and that's generally what I'm going to recommend to a new shooter. Your double action, single action certainly still have their place, but it's going to be, in my opinion, more for a dedicated carry gun if you really want to have that hammer down and that longer trigger pull, or it's especially still popular in competition shooting. So this isn't a double action versus striker fire video, though. This is a good trigger and a bad trigger. So I hope this was helpful. And obviously for your experienced shooters, this is going to be, most people are going to know most of this, but if you're just getting into shooting, these are things that you're going to want to look at when you're at the gun store, ask to try the trigger. Maybe you can shoot it at a range, something like that before you buy it, because it will definitely affect how you shoot. So anyway, thank you for watching.